Say something, Claude. What do you think?
You go to Aseem.
All right, Aseem.
Let him make an ass of himself.
Yeah, I'm the fall guy. The only thing economists actually economize on is happiness. And one of the classical economists who's not read anymore, but who I think is still relevant, somebody called David Ricardo. He used to call it the dismal science. And the reason why it used to be called the dismal science is because you can't have it all. In other words, scarcity is a fact of life. And I think that is probably the biggest illusion that economists have and that economists have spread by believing it themselves. And the reason I say that is that actually, if we have a sense of needs, and if we build an economy around needs, then actually abundance is the fact of life. Abundance is what nature is all about. There's a poem which some of you might know. I'm just going to paraphrase it here. It's from one of our medieval great poets, Rahim. And he says the tree does not yield fruit for itself. The pond does not have water in order to drink it itself, and so on. So nature is actually, of its very nature, of its very essence, a giving element, a giving thing, if you will. But to produce scarcity out of the fact of abundance has actually been the achievement of some intellectual geniuses from the economics profession, with some noble exceptions. So I think that there's a reason today why we should talk about the economics of happiness in order to create an abundance of it. And the way we create an abundance of happiness in a world like the kind that Helena just described, which is mad, which is addicted, which has to be de-addicted from oil, from money, from various interesting things like that. In such a world, I think we need to really understand the possibilities that nature actually makes available. And when I say nature, I include ourselves right in the midst of it. I think we have very much nature right here in this auditorium. We're not separate. It's again an illusion created by a highly processed environment, which makes us think that nature is out there and we are here. Anybody who breathes is already nature. So there's a whole machinery of illusions which we have to dismantle. And I think that that process has already been going on, and this conference is, I think, a big step in the right direction. Now over to Claude to destroy everything I said.
You've been a very wise man this morning compared to economists generally. But just to respond to what you have said, basically to say something beyond what you have said. Why do we think about only, when we think about economics, we think about production and goods and services. Now, we have Professor Rinpoche who spoke to us this morning, who is an exemplar of Buddhism, which actually doesn't talk about happiness. It's basically the Eightfold Path and how to get out of this circle of misery. And that is a separate economics, Buddhist economics, which really doesn't figure in any of the discussions, conventional discussions of economics that we have in our societies, in our academic institutions and so on. And similarly with a lot of other things which really have no relationship to goods or production of goods. And it indicates how much the modern mind has been conditioned that we think only in terms of goods, productions, economies, all those sort of things. But we really don't think about that part of our life which really has nothing to do with these things. Which is what you said, the economy, you talked about the abundance of nature. I'm talking about the abundance of what's within.
That's me.
This guy is a good academic. I'm talking about, for example, our archetypical guys who are people who really, in the end, own nothing. If you take my favorite heroes, they are Jain Munis. I've gone very often for these Diksha ceremonies because of my friendship with Maharaj, Guru Maharaj, who was a young diamond merchant who became a monk a couple of years ago. And he periodically keeps inviting me for these things. And the most powerful event today, if you ever want to really go and see one, is not to come to Goa to participate in sunburn, but it's basically, if you can go and see a Diksha ceremony anywhere in Gujarat where it takes place, and the most awesome thing that can move you, because part of the Diksha ceremony is this procession where the person who is becoming a monk actually has to distribute his patrimony or his heritage or whatever is owed to him among all the people along the roadside, and including the patrimony which is kept for him, which cannot be distributed to the other members of the family. It has to literally be thrown to people. And you have this phenomenon of a guy who is, or sometimes it's women also, young girls also, I've seen taking Diksha. They're moving in this procession and they're throwing everything. They're throwing the rupee notes, they're throwing silver, they're throwing cups, they're throwing all sorts of things to the public. And the public is there in a mad scramble trying to pick up all the rupee notes and so on. It's like that elephant thing. If you're watching from outside, you say, wow, here is one person liberating himself and a million other getting bonded. But that's economics. That's your economics. That's the way the world today is structured. And unfortunately, I thought part of this conference of economics, the economics of happiness, is to try and get people to really don't look at formal economies. They're a piece of bullshit. They're basically a gigantic effort to destroy the planet. And we know it, we can see it in front of our eyes daily, on a daily basis. And we've got to, somehow or the other, I'm one of those who believe in, I'm a Luddite of the old school, who still believes in crashing things, not people, but things. The things that we create, the structures that we create, mental structures, conditioning, and all those sort of things, just to get out, just to jump out of windows, to just get out. Because it's sometimes you feel that you are in a cage. And I was coming into Bangalore city yesterday morning with my colleagues. I said, this city which I used to live in 25 years ago, which was a garden city, today looks like a slave camp. Nobody was smiling anymore. Everybody was traveling from this side to that side, this side to that side. Half of them were stuck in a car. And nobody knew what they are doing. But they are all really dedicated to their slavery. Including 4 hours of sitting in a metal car, in a box, and not having anything to do. So these are the absurdities of modern economics. And when I meet an economist, I just turn off. Partly because I don't understand anything about economics. But I think that economists have really made human beings, intelligent human beings, into the laughing stock of the planet. He's going to support me.
In a sense, if you look at, I think one reason why we need to tangle with economics is because a lot of the prime ministers of this country, most countries, are trained in economics, as if that's the best. And he's not alone. I mean, most, probably Obama, they are all very, very expert, very, very fine economists. But the trouble is, economics, as you've both been saying, is so far removed from reality. And one of my themes at the moment is how economy and ecology, they mean almost the same thing. They mean basically the laws or the logic of correct housekeeping. And actually, among the few communities that have really are really living ecologically in a proper sense sustainably are the indigenous communities, whether of Ladakh or Central India, and it's getting very, very hard for them to do that. And in fact, most people often just talk about tribal people, Adivasis, they're very primitive or something, but they're incredibly highly developed in the art of sustainability, in the art of restraint in what they take from nature, and that is economics. Actually, when Aristotle used the word economia, he also used another word, chemistiki, which is the creating of wealth, which he said is not a very good activity. But that's what economists are basically concentrating on, creating wealth. And economia of how to create balance with what we have. This is, there are so many economic systems that have been thought of. Alternative economists, I don't know whether any of you know Clifford Hugh Douglas, who between the wars from the 1920s created an amazing alternative system and then was just slaughtered by the economists, ridiculed, basically based on taxing economic transactions and banks. So the province of Alberta in Canada, he got them to reduce their national debt enormously. What other country or state has managed to reduce the national debt? So there are so many possibilities there. Actually, if our dear economists and related people would turn their mind more to local and to human-centric possibilities. Because the trouble is, as a belief system, we talk about religious fundamentalism. What the Rinpoche said about religions is very true, but we see the problems of Christian or Islamic or Hindu fundamentalism. But there is no fundamentalism like the fundamentalism of economics, that it is so steeped in dogma that only the elite can question, and they have their formulas and rationality that they use in pursuit of something so irrational.
Felix, can you say something also about one of the hotbeds of this whole debate is in Orissa? Can you say something about your experiences there?
One of the things that I've concentrated on is mining, because both mining industry and the arms industry, which are very related, they're both the center of corruption. Like, it's very easy to talk about corruption in India. We all know it's there, but it doesn't start from India. It starts, among other things, from the arms industry and trade, where the amount of corruption there is phenomenal. And anybody who knows about the mining industry in India knows the corruption surrounding it is phenomenal. But, in a way, the ideology of it, for example, Orissa, it's often said, it says in Oriya school textbooks, Orissa is one of the poorest states in India, but it is very rich in minerals. All we have to do is develop the minerals in the mountains which are lying unutilized up there, and we will become the richest. And it is so deeply false at every level, that argument. And was argued, if you know about the Dongria, basically Niyamgiri is a big mountain range that is capped with bauxite. So a company taking the sacred name Vedanta launched itself in London to get finance for the aluminium industry, and it already built a refinery below the mountain of Niyamgiri, thinking it could easily then force the government to give it the bauxite mines and get, because the Dongria Kond who live in Niyamgiri, that special tribe, they have a taboo on cutting the forest at the top of the mountains. Their supreme deity is Niyam Raja, which means the king of law. And they understand, as in fact all of the tribals understand, that life comes from the mountains. Material life comes from the mountains because mountains are storehouses of water. So, you can find on YouTube one of the Dongria leaders called Lado Sikoka saying, people say there is crores, millions of rupees worth of minerals lying on a mountain. And if we utilize it, we'll all be rich. But I say that this is a complete lie, because Niyamgiri is our mother and father. Life comes from there. And the companies coming to steal it from us are like demons, the demons of mythology. They are like demons, Asur Manu. And I think it's there is such knowledge coming from traditional communities like this, and of course Helena was talking about it in that, and we all need to bring the voices from these local places.
Camila, how about Brazil? What's happening there? Can you share something?
A lot of things are happening there, and I'm very glad to be in India this time. This is my second time in India in a short period, in 2 years, because it's amazing to see the similarities of what is going on in Brazil and what's going on in India. So, for those who are familiar with the acronym BRICS, there is in the late years this trend that if the big economies, the US, the European Union, they were the ones to suffer the most, the economic depression after the 2008 crisis, there were these powers on the south to rise, and they would change the balance of power in the world. But what we are seeing is that this so-called shift that now China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and Russia, in another context, can play a different game. It's not true if we look of what is happening in our countries. We have a very, very intense trade, Brazil and China, and Brazil and India. And what this has changed in terms of environmental impacts, I dare to say that it's getting worse. It's getting worse because you have no urbanization in China without the iron ore that comes from the Amazon. And from India, Goa, sorry. I can also say that the changing eating patterns of the middle class in India that is becoming more and more addicted to the Western fattening and sickening diet is dependent on the soy that is also coming from Brazil for the industrial farmings and from all that. But I was commenting with someone that in Brazil we also have to buy something from India, and we are buying tons of vaccines to have inoculations, massive inoculations, in a population where this is sold as health. So instead of addressing the health needs, doing sanitation, a very basic thing, or try to use the amazing richness of the Amazon in terms of herbs and all the natural medicine that is in there, we need to buy, because this logic of trade, even between the BRICS country, it's not out of the system that Helena so gratefully described it earlier. So I think this is a big reason why we have to see this BRICS from below. We have to have more dialogue among our countries and among what is this fake idea that now there is a different development. There is a development led by the South. And it's all dependent on this massive urbanization that I pretty much think we urgently need to target in a much more stronger way than we have been targeted so far.
Carol, would you like to share something about what everyone's sharing, or your thoughts about economics? I know it's your favorite subject.
Yeah, maybe I'll bring a few things together. I had a nice conversation with Ria this morning. She was telling me about Goa and how there's so much trust there. People rent a bicycle and they don't even pay a deposit, and bring it back in 4 days. And an economist or a business or capitalist might look at that place and say, oh, here is a business opportunity. Here is an undeveloped market. Because we could replace this trust with security guards. We could replace mutual aid with insurance. There are many things that people do for each other that they could pay for instead. So it's a form of social capital that can be stripped away and then sold back. And the same thing is happening with the iron ore or even the health of the people in Brazil. Oh, here are some people who are eating a natural diet and using herbal medicine. Well, we could disempower that, take that away through advertising, through media, through the destruction of identity, through so-called science that tells them that the worldview that supports herbal medicine is invalid, that says that the sacred mountaintops, they're not sacred, that's superstitious nonsense. And so through many, many ways, taking this social capital and natural capital away and turning it into a product. So why are we doing this? It's tempting to say, well, it's because of that evil capitalist. I wish it were that simple. And I'm really happy that Helena said that it's not because of some evil people somewhere. We're very comfortable as at least my culture, the dominant culture of the world, is very comfortable with conquering evil as a way to solve a problem. But really, do you guys have the game musical chairs, where you have maybe 20 people, 19 chairs, and you're dancing around, and then the music stops? What if we played that here? And not only do you lose the game if you don't get a chair, but you don't get to eat today. And in fact, maybe your children don't get to eat. And very bad things happen to you. So everybody is playing this game of musical chairs, and the music stops, and elbowing each other out of the way and pushing. And maybe there's some very nice people who are being generous and sacrificing their chair. But the rules of the game are set up to drive selfish behavior. And that's exactly how our financial system works. Literally, I won't go into the details, but it's because of the way, and Helena was talking about this too, the way that money is created in our system as debt bearing interest. Always more debt than there is money, and artificial scarcity. In a world that's fundamentally abundant, even to the point, as Rinpoche was saying, that we even pay for water. Nothing is more abundant on earth than water, and we've managed to make even that artificial.